Welcome to the Sleep Sense Show. As always, brought to you by the Sleep Sense program, where podcast listeners can get a free customized sleep plan by going to www.sleepsense.net/listen.
Hi, I'm Dana, and welcome to today's show. Today I have a very special guest. Dr. Mary Wild is joining us today to talk about some common childhood sleep challenges that parents may face. Dr. Mary Wild is a board-certified pediatrician and owner of Image Pediatrics Behavioral Health and Wellness Center in St. George. She is a mother of 8 children, wow, and has created an online course called Overcoming Childhood Anxiety. She also has written a book called Faithful Nurturing, Mothering from the Heart to the Heart. You can find out more about Dr. Mary Wild at www.drmarywild.com. You know, I think we talk a lot about how to get our children to sleep well, and there's definitely some behavioral modifications that parents can make to help teach their children to become superstar sleepers. You can find out all that information in the Sleep Sense program. That's basically the heart of what I teach. But what about some of those sleep challenges that are a little out of the scope of just simple behavior modification? Things like bedwetting or night terrors are a common part of childhood, and we're going to talk today with Dr. Mary to find out a little bit more about some of the more common sleep disorders or challenges that she sees in her practice. And she's going to give you some useful tips or strategies for dealing with, or at least coping with, these specific challenges. So I hope that you'll hang tight and listen further into our conversation today with Dr. Mary Wild. Enjoy. Hi, everybody, and welcome to our show. I'm really excited about today's guest. Dr. Mary Wild is a pediatrician, and she's here today to talk to us more about some of the sleep-related issues that she sees in her office, and just to give us a bit of a perspective on how important sleep is in general for our children. So welcome to the show, Dr. Mary.
Thanks so much, Dana. I'm glad to be here.
Awesome. Well, why don't you just maybe start with sort of from your perspective, how important is sleep? I know we talk a lot, and there's been more and more being talked about it in the media, and it's something that's becoming a bit of a hot topic as of late. But how important is it that children are getting good quality sleep?
Sleep is so important. We know from the research and just by our own practical experience that sleep helps with mood, focus, memory, and it also helps with other just physical processes in our body, like our metabolism and keeping that on track, and just the restorative properties and functions of our bodies. It's just so important. And the American Academy of Pediatrics has come out with very specific recommendations by age that can be helpful to look at, but so many kids are not getting the recommended amount of sleep.
And why do you think that is? What are some of the main reasons?
Well, I think one of the big barriers is just the overcommitment that many kids experience, and so families in general are not honoring bedtime, and it can be so alluring to try to have our kids kind of in this resume building process, even from a very young age, you know, feeling like they need to be involved in this and that and the other thing to kind of compete with the demands of society and grow into their optimal selves, but we are really doing a disservice when their involvement gets in the way of their just general healthy practices like healthy sleep. Another big barrier, though, too, is technology boundaries, and when screens disrupt sleep by being in the bedrooms or being allowed to be used, at all hours. So that's another big factor.
Yeah, I agree. I think, parents really need to prioritize sleep. I think, other commitments and extracurricular activities are all wonderful and certainly an important part of a childhood, but not in the name of or sacrifice to sleep. I think that should come before anything else, really, in my opinion.
Yes.
Well, now, how often would you say in your practice that patients or parents come in and want to talk to you about sleep-related issues?
Well, definitely parents come in at times with that as the main issue that they're coming to talk to me about. But I will say that all the kids that come through my office, I specifically ask about sleep. And so it becomes a topic for all my visits because I feel it's so important. And so I did go ahead and select by age category some of the main issue that kind of comes up. So perhaps I could go through those with you.
Yeah, I would love that.
Okay, so I kind of divided it up according to the age groups of infancy, preschool age, school age, and teenage years. So first of all, in infancy, one of the big issues, which I know you help parents so much with, is the idea of just setting those routines and sleep hygiene. And a big thing that I talk about with parents in this age group is the idea of sleep associations. Mm-hmm. So making sure that they are not creating sleep associations for their kids, creating specific contexts that their baby will kind of insist upon and depend on to be there for them to fall asleep. So let me illustrate. So many babies fall asleep nursing or eating out of a bottle or being held. And so we know that during the times of lighter sleep, there are these brief arousals, or at least times of easier arousal. And if babies expect there to be a nipple in their mouth or arms around them in these lighter phases of sleep, they will wake up, just like we would if suddenly our pillow and our comforter were gone. So I really advise parents to not have their babies fall asleep connected with something that won't be available to them all through the night. So right. To put their babies in their bed drowsy but not asleep.
Absolutely. So. I love it. Great advice.
So that's a big thing for infants. Now with preschoolers, one common thing that comes up for this age group is night terrors. Mm-hmm. And this can be really scary for parents because night terrors are moments when children don't fully awake, but it's when they have a partial arousal during the deepest phase of non-REM sleep and seem very out of sorts. And it's like their stress response system is just having this high activation. Parents might see their child being sweaty, having a fast heart rate, fast breathing, and maybe the child screams and cries and thrashes. And so for a parent, this is very, very upsetting, and they try to console the child but the child is inconsolable because they're not really awake, so they're not really receptive to the parents' efforts. And this peaks between 3 and 4 years, but really can be seen up in, between like 3 to 12, and sometimes even younger than that. But so in this situation, I just talked to parents about the fact that sleep or night terrors can be developmentally normal. They don't need to be alarming unless it's really interfering with the child's sleep or causing safety issues. Like if they're concerned that the child is going to hurt themselves during these episodes. But it can be really important to look at some underlying causes, because night terrors are more common when there's high stress, when there's sleep deprivation, when sleep schedules have been disrupted, or in the case of illness, like when there's a high fever. So it's good to kind of look at the causes and address these things. But other than that, mostly just be reassured. One great tip that can help parents if the night terrors are happening on a semi-regular basis, often parents notice that they happen at kind of a specific time of night, and often it's between midnight and 2 a.m., and parents can do a little interruption of the sleep cycle and wake the child up about 15 minutes before the night terror typically happens, and then it kind of resets things and it can circumvent the process. So for parents that have repeated issues with night terrors, that's something that they can try.
That's a great suggestion. And, I hear a lot of parents confusing nightmares and calling them the same thing as night terrors. And so maybe hearing it from your lips will reassure them that there is a big difference between a nightmare and a night terror, correct?
Yes, and the biggest distinction, I think, to keep in mind is that nightmares, they both cause a child to be upset, but the nightmare usually is followed by a full arousal and an upset child, but one that can be consoled, and usually a child that remembers the incident the next day, whereas night terrors, they have not ever fully aroused. They're inconsolable, so seem unresponsive to all the measures of comfort that the parent is attempting, and then they do not have a recollection of the event the next day. So sometimes it can be sorted out even after the fact, as they ask about it the next day, like, do you remember last night what happened?
Yeah.
So.
And I think for the parent watching it, it looks like the child is in a great deal of distress and very, very fearful. Is there anything behind that? It's hard for us to know exactly what a child's experiencing in that moment, but from your perspective, what do you think is actually happening physiologically with them?
Well, certainly it is, through some type of imagined dream state, they are having activation of their stress response system. And so we know that when that happens, it just sets in motion all sorts of physiologic responses. Cortisol is released, the heart rate increases, the respiratory rate increases, the eyes dilate, changes the blood flow. It's just a natural process that happens whenever we feel like we're under threat.
Right.
And so it's a very normal thing. And but of course, it's upsetting to watch it as a parent, because you never want to see your child in distress. But I think, there's a whole science and study of dreams and their function, and there is something happening in terms of processing, and even going through and rehearsing perhaps, the way we will respond to certain threats. And I guess parents can be reassured by the fact, especially if the child is not remembering these events, that likely they're not coming into the conscious awareness and affecting the child's functioning overall.
Yeah, that makes sense.
If there are remembered nightmares, then that can be something that might need more processing, and there are specific strategies to deal with these. One being processing and talking through the nightmare and helping the child reframe the experience, even to make it comical, like going through the situation that happened and helping them create a new ending and a new scenario. So that's for nightmares. And with either night terrors or nightmares, if the parent reflects on the situation and really acknowledges that there are some major underlying stresses, certainly those do need to be addressed, and perhaps with some professional help. But the fact that we dream, the fact that we have internal experience that even can subconsciously or consciously upset us, is kind of wired into our sleep. So it's a very interesting topic.
Yeah,
it's a normal thing.
Yeah.
So.
Excellent. All right, and what are some other things that you see come up in the school age child?
So for school age children, the topic I thought we could address or bring up is the idea of bedwetting. And so this is not necessarily dealing with sleep per se, but it certainly is happening, during when people are supposed to be sleeping, and it really is a big issue for families. So another more scientific word for this is nocturnal enuresis. And there's been a lot of research going into this, and they really have found that there are familial associations. So if you or your partner has experienced bedwetting issues, then your child is at more risk of having these issues. And there can be several factors, but it can be a normal thing up to a certain age. So on average, children achieve daytime dryness by age 4, and but nighttime dryness comes a little more slowly. And even up to the age of 8, about 10% of kids are still wetting the bed. And so I think it's important to have parents realize that this is a common issue, and often it's not talked about, so they can feel very alone.
Right.
And it can be very upsetting, not only because it disrupts sleep, but also it involves a lot of cleanup, and so it can be kind of an emotional issue. So a couple of things that I like to emphasize to parents on this topic is really the importance of not having shame and punishment come in, that it's a non-volitional problem. So it's not like the kids are trying to wet the bed. So they really need to be met with a supportive, loving approach. And there's some things that can be really helpful. So Dr. Steve Hodges, he has written a book called It's No Accident, and he has studied clients and found a lot of success in helping kids improve their nighttime dryness by addressing underlying constipation. And so this is a huge issue to make sure that if there is bedwetting happening, that you make sure that there's not any underlying constipation, because that affects children's ability to sense their bladder fullness and control their bladder function. So that's super important. And then it can be helpful to do a few other things. So I always tell parents, especially once you get out of the age when there are typically pull-ups used and made. So, there are 4 T pull-ups, 5 T pull-ups, and things like that. But once you get beyond that age, I really recommend that they stay away from using diapers, pull-ups, and things like that, because that can sort of be a Band-Aid to make it not seem like an issue to the child. Because if the child is feeling that, well, there's a solution, I have a diaper on, I have a pull-up on, it will just catch it if I go pee in the night, then there's not as much motivation to change. So I really recommend doing away with those things, and involving the child in the cleanup, not in a punitive way, not like, you'd rub a puppy's nose in a puddle or something like that, but just in a very understanding and with the communication that this is the responsible thing to do. Right. We clean up messes. We clean up messes that we make. And so we're going to work together on this. It can be really helpful to have a fitted waterproof mattress cover. And I even read the suggestion of having layers of mattress covers where you have, the waterproof mattress cover, then the sheet, then another waterproof mattress cover, and then the sheet. So if in the night something happens, then you can quickly just take off the first layer and then kind of have your plan B in place, because that can be really hard as a parent to be patient, remaking the bed, finding the clean sheets, so that can be helpful. And I have special training in pediatric hypnosis, and this can be a really useful strategy. It's listed in the literature as kind of an alternative practice, but there actually are some wonderful studies talking about its usefulness. And in fact, we could have a whole nother episode on that if you want at some point. But the idea of just helping kids in a very focused way set the intention of being dry, and then I always have kids create their own charts and take ownership over them. And they're dry charts, not wet charts. So they're not marking when they're wet, they're marking when they're dry. And so whole reframing and shift. And so this can be really helpful, and it can be helpful to have an external person that you're reporting to. So those are just a few things about ways to address nocturnal enuresis or achieve nighttime dryness.
And so so up to the age of 8 would be considered sort of in the realm of normal for a child to be experiencing some bedwetting, and past 8, would that be sort of maybe not a red flag, a pink flag that perhaps some underlying issues might be involved?
Right, or at least, and sometimes there really isn't an underlying issue, but it's just the age when, you certainly want to rule out underlying issues, and you want to fix the problem, because that's when kids really start caring about it, and it can start affecting their self-worth and self-efficacy.
Sure.
So I think that that's a good age to particularly pay attention. However, kids who are not dry earlier and want to be, and if it's an issue for the family, it can be addressed earlier. And it rarely will parents be super successful if the child is not motivated to change.
Right.
And so I think it's important to look for those clues. Of course, there are other strategies as well, like alarms. There are medications that can be used, particularly for short-term problems, like if a child wants to go to an overnight camp or, go on a sleepover to increase the likelihood that they'll be successfully dry through the night during that time. But the medications, they don't solve the problem. They just are kind of like a Band-Aid, and so it's important to have other strategies as well.
Right.
So.
Well, I really love this topic, actually, because I get a lot of emails and questions from parents who are working on the Sleep Sense program with toddlers or preschoolers, and there's this pressure to have these young toddlers or preschoolers going through the night without any bathroom breaks or any pull-ups. And I always say, listen, sleep is way more important than being nighttime dry. If your child's not ready to go all night without a trip to the bathroom, then let's not sacrifice sleep in the name of a dry bed, right? I would way rather see kids wearing a pull-up to bed to prevent accidents and sleeping all night than being, awoken from slumber at midnight by a parent with the demand that you go to the bathroom before mom goes to bed. So my advice is always to just, be patient with it and not to put a bunch of pressure on yourself as a parent or on the child and let this little one sleep through the night and worry about nighttime dryness later on at a later date.
And I really like what you said about, about just being patient and kind of trusting in the natural maturation and process. And one thing I emphasize to my patients and parents is just the idea that, there are a few things as parents that we really can't control. We can't control our kids eating, sleeping, and going to the bathroom. Like, we can do a lot of things to influence the environment, but we can't force, because ultimately we are there as people to help them be successful. But anytime, you have somebody who's like waking up a child, insisting that they go to the bathroom at a specific time, it just is an invitation for a power struggle.
Yes.
And so I think that is wise not to try to take that on, because ultimately kids need to feel that they can successfully go to sleep on their own, that they can feed themselves successfully, that they can be have control over when they pee and poop.
Absolutely. I agree 100%. That's absolutely an important part of growing up and learning to be a full functioning human being. So I agree with that. And are there any other things that we should be watching out for maybe as our children get a little older into the adolescent and teen years? Yes.
So what I thought that we would talk about for the teenagers is the delayed sleep phase disorder. So this is teenagers who are having trouble falling asleep before like 2 a.m. And it's not just that they're night owls, it's that even when they're tired, they can't seem to successfully fall asleep. And it's really an issue of their internal clocks being sort of off. And it's really a tricky thing, because I feel like our teenagers are being sent mixed messages. On one hand, we tell them, oh yes, have these healthy practices, get rest, eat well, take time to exercise and do these things. But on the other hand, we have these societal demands like, you need to have this and that and the other thing on your college application. You need these grades. You need to succeed in these ways. And so it's a lot of pressure. And I think this probably contributes to kids getting their body clocks off. But some just pretty simple but powerful strategies with this can be just working with your teenager to set back their bedtime just by 15 minutes every few days and until you approach your goal bedtime. And so you have to kind of be patient with this, because a lot of times the process of getting off track has happened over time, and so you have to be a little patient as you get yourself back on track in terms of resetting your internal clock. But if you can get your teenager on board with this and help them feel motivated to change, so not have it be like a punishment, like you have to go to bed 15 minutes earlier now and 15 minutes earlier than that, and but really talk with them about the benefits of improving their sleep and sleeping at times that the general public sleeps, and being awake at the times that the general public is awake, because it really helps with functioning. But so setting back bedtime just those 15 minutes every few days, and then you can also do some melatonin supplementation. You can do some light box therapy in the morning, but even just setting the bedtime back alone can be really helpful. In extreme cases, sometimes we recommend that, especially if they're having a break from school and they have some more flexibility, that they actually set their bedtime forward a couple hours for about 5 to 6 days at a time, and then to eventually arrive at the desired bedtime going the opposite direction. So if they're going to bed more like 4 in the morning, then it might be easier to do it that way than going backwards. So both are strategies that are used, but just trying to help your teenager get back on schedule with general society, just so they can function well as students, as workers, as participants in things. Because sometimes when teenagers end up sleeping at the times when everyone else is awake and being awake when everyone else is asleep, it can cause problems. It can cause isolation, and it can cause also more technology use, when they're not really being supervised or in a socialized situation, and it can lead to kind of undesirable behaviors as well. So just trying to get teenagers on a schedule that is in line with society and kind of for their best interest,
It's tough,
So-
I've got 3 teenagers myself, and one of the things that is a big challenge for us in Florida, and I know there's a bit of a movement in place to get school times altered. My 3 children have to be up and out the door by 7 in the morning to get to school on time, and I know as a sleep expert myself that their body clock is biologically altered to be less fatigued at sort of the 9 to 11 o'clock hour and not really ready for bed until that 11 plus. So asking a teenager to get up for a 7:30 start time would be like asking an adult to get up for a 4:30 start time. Like, it's just biologically not advisable. So that's one thing that they definitely struggle against. And a big thing that I always recommend too is just turning off screens even an hour before you want them to go to bed, and asking them to maybe listen to music, or read a book, or do something that doesn't involve like just blasting their eyes with the blue light coming from their devices. And that can make a huge difference on how sleepy they feel by the time that imposed bedtime rolls around.
That's so true. I think that's really wise. And what you say about bedtimes, it just brings up the idea that we have to be realistic. So obviously we're not going to shoot for bedtimes that are like 9 o'clock for most teenagers. When you get into this delayed sleep phase, disorder, we're talking about bedtimes that are like after 2 a.m., or
Right.
but even after midnight, sometimes you can get into some problems. But because you really have to think about how many hours does a teenager need to sleep. And so the American Academy of Pediatrics, for example, says let's shoot for at least 8 to 10 hours.
Yeah.
And so then you have to say, okay, what time does my child need to go to, need to get up? And then you have to count backwards. And it is so great when the school systems and other institutions recognize the benefits from later start times. And thankfully, when kids get older and are in college, they can start selecting these things and choosing times that are more in line with their own body clocks. But until that time, we do sort of have to exist in the structure that is set. And so do a little math and say, okay, my child needs to be up at this time, so let's work back and try to get them in bed at least 8 hours before that, and have phones and screens removed at least 1 hour before that.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have your target at least.
Right.
So
that's a start anyway, right?
Right.
Yeah.
It's a start.
Baby steps. Yeah, just baby steps.
Right. Right. And recognizing that our teenagers are sort of put in a double bind.
They are.
They are put in a situation that makes it very hard to be healthy and successful at the same time. But it's so important to teach these skills early, because really overdriven, unbalanced teenagers, we know, will turn into overdriven, unbalanced adults, like some of us are, know. So we need to try to instill these habits now and give them the permission to maybe say, you know what, I'm not going to be part of this early morning club. It sounds great and everything, but it's just not healthy for me.
Right.
Or, and also to really be aware of your teenagers and maybe other underlying issues that could be contributing to their sleep. So anxiety is a big thing too that contributes to insomnia
mm-hmm.
and difficulty falling asleep. And so addressing some of those things as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's teen sleep is a whole other podcast for sure, right?
Exactly. It certainly is.
It's a big one. Well, great. This has been some really useful and helpful information that you've provided us with. And just in sort of our parting remarks here, is there sort of, if you could have parents walk away with just one little piece of advice, or just planting a little seed for change in their minds, what would that be when we're talking about their children's sleep?
Mm-hmm. I think the two big messages would be honor bedtime as a family. Mm. And then the other thing would be, as you honor bedtime, don't let electronics encroach in on that healthy habit. So really feel empowered to set boundaries around technology use that supports bedtime and other healthy practices.
I love that. I think that's really important too. Our children learn by watching, right? How we mm-hmm. model is one of their mm-hmm. most powerful learning strategies. So if you're mm-hmm. trying to tell your children how important it is to get to bed on time and to sleep well, hopefully you're also modeling that same behavior and getting yourself to sleep at appropriate hours and putting your sleep as a priority too. I think tackling it as a family, if you're sort of in a place right now where it's disarray for everybody, kind of call a family meeting and come together as a group and decide to put this at the top of the priority list and create some healthy habits around the family sleep. And I mean, the good news is that everyone will reap those benefits.
Definitely, and for years and years to come. So it's a wonderful, wonderful advice.
Well, great.
So thank you for the work you do.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Wild. I really appreciate you taking time to speak with us today.
Yes, thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody, for listening. Sleep well.
Thanks so much for listening. For more great tips on helping your child sleep through the night, remember to subscribe, rate, and review the show on iTunes or Stitcher, and never miss an episode.